Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. It's Neo Forza time. Alright, so today we've got two kits here, and this is DDR4, both of these kits, and they are both 64 gig kits, so each one of these sticks is 32 gigabytes. But the difference here is the speeds, so we've got one kit that's 4,000 and the other kit is 3,600. We'll talk a little more about that here in a little bit. All right, so let's talk about Neo Forza and what they offer. Okay, so Neo Forza actually operates under the company, I guess the parent company you could call it. Let's see here. It's Gold Key. Yeah, Neo Forza is the brand entity under Gold Key Technology Corporation, which has been around since 1998, but Neo Forza has been around since, I believe, 2018. So the product variations that we've got here, we've even got actually all the way down to the good old reliable 2.5-inch SATA drives. They're still making those, and they still have their purpose, of course. We've got a couple different varieties here of your NVMe drives in the PCIe 3.0 flavor. And for even faster speeds, we've got PCIe 4.0. Got a few varieties there that are screaming fast. We've got DDR3 memory, DDR4, and DDR5, but today we are looking at DDR4. So we've got 4 variations of the DDR4. So we'll start down here with the PNP or plug and play, and then we go to the gold N key, the black Faye, which is what we have today, and then the Mars. And the Mars has the RGB effects at the top. The Faye does not. Okay, so looking at the black Faye, quick bit of information here. So we've got a variety of densities there on the modules. So we've got 8 gig modules all the way up to a 64 gig kit, which is composed of 2 32 gigabyte modules, which is what we have today. Your latency here, we go from CL15 to CL19. Oh, I forgot about the speed. So we go from 3,000 megahertz to 5,000 megahertz, 1.35 volts to 1.60 volts. On the AMD side, we've got the AMP support. On Intel, we've got the XMP 2.0 support. Forged aluminum alloy heat sinks, up to 12 layers on the PCB. Overclocking chips surpassing the JEDEC standards, wide compatibility, and a lifetime warranty. And as far as the specifications go, let me open the tab, and to make this a little easier to read, let me bring up this slide. And the specifications for the two kits that we have today, highlighted in yellow is the 3600 kit, and then in the light blue there is the 4000 kit. And you can see the differences there in the timings there in the latencies. The 3600 is just slightly lower on the latencies compared to the 4000 kit. And of course the voltages are different with the 3600 kit at 1.35 volts and the 4000 at 1.4. And of course you can compare the specifications of all of the other varieties of the Neo Forza Black Faye memory. All right, we are back to the Neo Forza webpage to see if there's anything else here under the overview. Let's see, professionally sorted chips. What that means is they hand pick chips that only perform to the specifications that they've laid out. So that way you know you're getting a chip that will meet your expectations. 10-layer PCB, low latency, limited lifetime warranty, XMP 2.0. So we'll actually show that here in just a little bit on my test motherboard. Let's see, overclocking, performance stability, one-step overclock, high voltage tolerance, low CAS. All that is good. Let's see, we've got heat dissipation via surface treatment and micro fins. And it's a little hard to see, but they've machined tiny little grooves here. I'm not sure how much that really adds to the heat dissipation. It certainly can't hurt, but that's probably more of a marketing thing. So the two things that are really important with your memory, the two things are, of course, speed. Everybody wants the fastest memory. And stability. You don't want your system crashing. And of course, memory is one of those things that, you know, you just plug it in and it works. It's like a power supply. You know, you plug it in, it works, it does its thing, it lasts for years and years. You don't ever really think about it. You don't have to go in and make any adjustments. It just simply works, and memory is pretty much the same way. All right, so looking at the physical attributes here, we've got some pretty good size thin metal heat sinks here that basically sandwich the actual PC and the chips. But you can look right down through the center there. It's wide open and it's not closed off at the top, you can see. And what I like about that is you get some air circulation down through the center to help keep your memory cool. And I'll get an overall height here once I get it installed on the motherboard so you can see, because in some cases that's important if you've got a usually an air cooler that can get in the way, and your memory height makes a difference. But anyway, looking at the stickers here on the side, so you can see we've got one kit here, or one set, that is 3600 CL18, 1.35 volt. And the next one here is the speed is 4000 with CL19 at 1.4 volts. So a slight difference there, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any real difference in the performance. So one thing to say about kits this size, these are again 64 gigabyte kits, so each one of these modules is 32 gigabytes. And that's massive overkill for the average user. Even the average gamer. Usually 16 gigabytes is sort of the sweet spot for most systems, and that's usually plenty. 32, you can take it up a notch, but 64 and anything over 64 is for your content creators, your enthusiast level, people who need an enormous amount of space for their content creation, videos and photos, things like that. So again, this is really for the enthusiast or the content creator. All right, so I've got two of the 4000 modules plugged into the appropriate slots, and your motherboard will usually have an indication down here. You can see right there. It's hard to see, but it tells you, let me zoom in, it shows you which slots to use if you're only going to use, you know, 2 sticks, for example. So that's sort of important, because sometimes, it depends on the system, sometimes they don't like to boot up if the memory isn't in the proper slots. Now, of course, if you're populating all 4, then it doesn't really matter. Anyway, the test system here, this is an MSI Tomahawk Z690 DDR4 version. They have DDR5 versions, but this is the DDR4. DDR4, of course, is slowly being phased out, being replaced by DDR5, but there's nothing wrong with DDR4, and there are plenty of boards out there that still use it. Now, I just measured the height, and it's important to make sure your system is powered down, but I measured the height of the memory, and it is approximately 45.42 millimeters off of the surface of the motherboard, the overall height. So again, that's really only important if you've got a large air cooler that sort of overhangs over your memory slots there. Okay, we will power the system up, and I'll go right into the BIOS, and we can take a look at what the settings are. So I'll spam the delete key, and we should dump right into the BIOS. Give it a moment. There we go. Okay, so this is an Intel system, of course. We're using a 12600KF CPU on this motherboard. But as far as our memory profiles go, and we've got 2 options here. You can actually turn it off altogether if you don't want to use either one of the XMP profiles. But these are basically canned settings that are set up by Intel, and you've got an option to not use either one, and you can use XMP Profile 1 or you can use XMP Profile 2, and when you reboot the system, it will boot up with the settings for either profile that you select. Now, typically, either one of these profiles will work. Your system should boot up just fine, but every once in a while you get some memory that is a little picky, and it will only work on one of the profiles. Usually that's when you've got all 4 slots populated, and there's a bit of a load on the memory controller, and sometimes in those cases you will get a system that will only boot into one of the profiles. But for the most part, especially when you're only running 2 sticks, usually you don't have a problem with either one of the profiles. Anyway, looking at what the profiles mean, we'll look at XMP profile 1 first, and on this MSI board, you can drill down here and get into the information. All the motherboards should have the ability to access this information, but XMP profile setting 1, you can see this gives you the maximum speed that the memory is rated at, so 4,000 megahertz. These are your timings right there, your basically your latency, which is your the time it takes to send information to the memory and the time it takes to retrieve the information for the memory. Generally, the lower these numbers are, the better as far as latency, so that means you can just read and write the information to the memory faster. There's the voltage. Now if we switch over here to XMP profile 2, and then go back over here and look at what we have, now you can see it has changed. We went from 4,000 to 3,200, so our clock speed on the memory has gone down, but you'll notice these numbers are smaller than the numbers that were here before. So our latency has also gone down. So again, the lower these numbers are, the better. The lower the latency, the faster you can read and write the information to the memory, and the voltage here has also dropped. And again, these are the basically presets that are not going to damage your system. You can run at either one of these all day long and not worry about causing any damage to your memory. You can go in and mess around with your timings and the voltages. I don't recommend that because if you don't know what you're doing, you can mess things up, and the gains that you get usually are minimal for the most part. So I would recommend sticking with one of the 2 profiles there for the best stability and performance. Now I've got this test system out in the open here, so there isn't really much in the way of air moving across the memory modules. Usually when you're in a case, you've got some sort of airflow to help keep the temperatures down. So when I do the stress testing, you'll see me probably add this little fan over here to keep some air moving across the memory modules. Now we did talk about profile 1 and 2, but there's actually the 3rd setting, which is when neither one of these are enabled. And we can come down here, and when neither are enabled, you can see your speed drops way down. You're down to 2666 megahertz. And our timings, let's see if I hit F5. This brings up a nice quick reference that shows you what the settings are for XMP profile 1. And again, we're at 4,000 when we're in profile 1. These are your settings. And then I can just move down here and it goes to profile 2. So I go up, profile 1, down, it goes to profile 2. You can see the numbers change here when I go back and forth between profile 1 and profile 2. And then this is your JDEC standard, which is neither one of the profiles enabled, and these are what your settings look like when you're in this mode. And again, you're at 2666, I believe, on the on the speed when neither one are enabled. You can run it at that, but why? Because these work just fine, and you will get the most bang for your buck. So we're going to start in XMP profile 1. So we click that and then go ahead and reboot. All right, so we are looking at CPU-Z. I'm on the memory tab. I'm comparing the memory controller frequency to the actual memory frequency. Now, if you remember, on the 11th generation is when Intel decoupled the memory controller frequency from the DRAM frequency. It used to be 1-to-1, which was gear 1, and it was locked. You couldn't change it. But starting with the 11th generation, you can actually change it. And as I showed earlier, we are in gear 2. Now, ideally, I would like the system to run in gear 1 at this frequency, but it didn't like it, so we will just run in gear 2. Now, if it were running in gear 1, these would be 1-to-1, so we would have 2,000 roughly here and here, but we don't. This is half. There is gear 1, gear 2, and gear 4, and you don't usually use gear 4. You want to stick with 1 or 2. Let's see. The testing I'm going to do is using the RAM test. And this will stress test the system to sort of make sure that it's stable. And then up here, Benchmate. This is a nice program. It's a suite of programs that are sort of embedded, and you can go in here and pick whichever benchmarks or stress test you want to run, which is what we have here. These are all the synthetic benchmarks, and I ran a few gaming benchmarks down here, and I collected all the data. And on the left is the information or the data that I collected for the 4000 megahertz set of memory, and over here is the 3600. And if we look a little more closely, you can see the 4000, we've got profile XMP1 and XMP2. Over here on the 3600, if you recall, the XMP1 was the only one that was active, so we don't have anything for the XMP2. And when you compare all of these XMP profiles, the best performing one is the XMP1 on the 4000, and the XMP1 on the 3600 sort of performs in between the two XMP profiles of the 4000. And there's not a lot of difference between them. You can see the numbers are a little better. Here on the XMP1, lower is better for the Y-Cruncher and the SuperPi. Your Cinebench, TimeSpy, and FireStrike Extreme, the higher the number, the better. So you can see again, not a lot of difference. When we get down here to the AIDA64 cache and memory benchmarks, it's the same type of story here. The best performance is over here on the XMP1 profile on the 4000. The XMP1 profile on the 3600 comes in next, and the XMP2 profile on the 4000 is actually comes in third. But even then, overall, there's not a huge amount of difference here between really 1, 2, and 3 in terms of performance. Now we look at Blender, we're even closer here. There's almost no difference at all between the 4000 and the 3600 memory kits. And then when we look at gaming, when we look at XMP1 and 2 for Borderlands, there's not a lot of difference here on the frames per second or the average frame time. Borderlands over here on the 3600, again, 47 frames per second, 47.6. We're well within the margin of error here. So if I ran these same benchmarks over and over, there'd be a gray area that would sort of blur between the two, with neither one of them really standing out. In the Formula 1 22, again, it's the same story. 57 frames per second, 59. We've got 60. So we're well within a few frames of each other. So not a lot of difference between the two different memory kits. All right, so a quick side note here. Some people will ask, can you mix and match modules from different kits, even different manufacturers? And short answer is maybe. Years ago, it seems like you could mix and match modules and the systems didn't care, but that's not that way today. So generally, you want to stick with the modules that are in the kits, make sure they're all the same speeds, same timings, and all that. But sometimes you can actually get different modules from different kits and different manufacturers to boot up. Now, I tried the two kits from Neo Forza, the 3000 or the 3600 and the 4000, and it would not boot. Of course, the voltages here are different between the two, and that may be the reason, but it would not boot. However, when I grabbed another set of modules here that are also 1.4 volts, the same as the 4000, it took it a moment. The DRAM light over there stayed on and flickered a few times, but it actually did boot. So I've got some Mushkin Redline Lumina in there with the Neo Forza, just to show you that it does work sometimes. However, stability-wise, I wouldn't trust it, and really there's no reason to do this, but this is just a quick, yeah, can you do it? Maybe. And remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should, so I would stick with the kits. Now here's something cool. They actually sent me 2 of the 64 gig 4000 kits, and you can see I've got all 4 of them plugged in, and the system booted up, and I didn't have to do anything special. I didn't have to get in and tweak anything in the BIOS. It just fired right up. So right there you can see at 128 gigabytes. Now it did only boot up in XMP2, but it runs through the stability tests and it runs through all of the benchmarking with no issues, so that is cool. Alright, so throughout all of the testing and benchmarking with either one of these kits, I had no problems with stability or performance. They did just fine. Again, these are 64 gig kits, each one of these, so they are massive overkill for the average user. They're more for the content creator, somebody who needs a massive amount of memory, if you're running a virtual machine, things like that. Okay, pricing. Right now the MSRP for the 3600 64 gigabyte kit is $169. The 4000 kit, which is over in my system right now, this one is $219 MSRP. Keep your eyes open on Newegg and Amazon. They're always running little sales and special deals. So my experience with Neo Forza is definitely a good one, especially when I can boot up 128 gigabytes of RAM. Don't know what I'm going to do with all that memory, but hey, why not? So I would give this the Overclockers Club Editor's Choice Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.